Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting to you live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with a brand new episode, possibly a series. We'll find out how it goes with author and, my goodness, I got to read you this bio. It's so long. I'm going to have her tell you about it. Okay, she is here's part of the bio. A socio-biblical and historical research specialist. Yes, that is a mouthful, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. She is the author of a magnificently selling book, YHWH Exists, and we're fixing to talk about this right now as we bring to you from her home. Thank you, Jodell. Thank you for being with us. My goodness, it is such a pleasure to have you on the broadcast. Welcome to Tanakh Talk.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here, William.
Wow. I was, your bio's so long. There was no way I could really do it justice. And so I thought, the reason why you're here is to tell us about your bio, is to tell us about what it is that took you from birth to this point of being this fantastic author and this historical research specialist. It's amazing. And I'm thinking, my little life that I have, a carpenter and doing Tanakh Talk, is just that alone is occupying so much of my time. I'm thinking, how do you do it? That is amazing.
It's difficult because when you have a family, as you know, it requires a lot of dedication, a lot of focus and balancing. So there's been a lot of balancing going on for the last 16 years. Definitely.
That is amazing. Okay, tell us real quick, just real quickly, what is your family size right now?
We have 6 children. My eldest is at Ole Miss. I have another daughter that's going to another university in Mississippi. And then I have 4 children. I have a high school age son and 3 younger children that are still in grade school, and we homeschool. So very, very busy indeed.
I really hope that your children are good enough with homeschooling that they kind of are self-propelled.
They had to be.
That's good. That's good. We're homeschooling, and our 2 little ones are very young. They're 9 and 11. And my wife, bless her heart, she is just a full-time teacher. She's a full-time mom, and it's literally so much. I don't know how she does it. I really don't. So, and you, same thing.
Yeah, it is. And, I have had to teach my children to be more self-reliant, to go get the answers for themselves. And I'm really, really proud of them. They're doing very, very well. They're excelling. My eldest has had 2 years where she has maintained a 4.0 for both years. So in college. So I'm very proud.
Seriously. Wow. That's fantastic. That is fantastic.
I'm proud of her. She works hard.
My GPA in school was, and I survived, but I can't really get into how much.
As they say, your GPA does not define you. And several studies have shown that those that are like mid B, low Bs, they actually are the ones that end up being very successful in life because they seem to be balanced with a lot of life skills and know how to apply it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. A lot of people tell me, you shouldn't homeschool your children. They're going to miss out on all the important things of social. I'm thinking, you know what? If I can't teach my kids social skills, I'm the one that needs to go back to school, not them.
Right, exactly. And I do find, it is a challenge for us because we live rurally. So the social is a little bit of an issue for us, but I live in a county, or several counties in our area where we have the largest homeschool population in the states that we're in.
Wow.
So we have a lot to choose from, and there's a lot of activities. There's a lot of interaction that is available, in a couple cities away from us.
That's really great. I'm really happy for you. I'm very, very excited that the life that you live is something that I can be a part of. And you're telling me, and you're telling the viewers, and it's really nice. I really like that.
It really is. There's so many. I know when I started let's not say how many years ago. I'll do the, how many years ago too. But when I started, we really didn't have all the resources that we have today. And those resources are just phenomenal. They enable you to provide your children with an education that honestly they cannot get in public school. They can't get anywhere else because it's a striving for excellence. And some of the programs and the what's out there is just phenomenal. So very professional and top notch as far as education is concerned.
That's really good. Well, Jodell, there are so many people who don't know who you are. There's, let me see. I know typically we only, we'll range between in the live broadcast, especially when they're late at night. A lot of people don't watch live. We'll have anywhere from 5 to 35 that watch live, but then the videos will actually, get 300-400 hits like in the first week on YouTube. And typically, so you've got a lot of people who may not know who you are. And especially like the subscribers to Knock Talk on YouTube, they may not know who you are either. So that's the very first thing we're going to discuss is who is Jodell and what is it that actually provoked you to be an author to begin with, but more so the journey that you're on. But
sure. Where
I want to start at though, let's take it way, way back. Let's take it back to when you were a kid. Where were you raised up? I mean, I want to know who is Jodell?
Sure.
What was her family life? I mean, was she a cornbread and chicken type girl? Was she, what's some of the fancy foods they have? Caviar and I don't know.
For me, it would have been Worthington hot dogs and Loma Linda Chick-fil-A type. So I was born in Fort Worth, Texas. I have one brother and my parents who are still married, and I was raised Seventh-day Adventist, and I lived in Fort Worth, actually as a small city outside of Fort Worth, until I was about 9, and then we moved to Washington State, where we lived for about 1.5 years. I was there when Mount St. Helens blew.
Wow.
So that made an impression on me. And then we came back to Texas. I think I cried almost every day that I was in Washington State because I was so homesick for Texas. When you grow up in Texas and you have that, I don't know, living in Texas, there's just something about the state, the Republic of Texas, where you have this identity that is full of pride and honor, and you really don't find that in other places where you live. So I am a Texas girl. And so we came back to Texas, and I lived there until I met my husband, and then we married and I moved to New Orleans. The other side of that is that I was born into a family that was just absolutely wonderful. My parents always taught me to have a relationship with God. They always taught me in Scripture. I went to a religious school. And then beyond that, I can't say how much my upbringing, I'm very grateful to my parents. And they taught me what I would call, fruits of the Spirit, where you're taught temperance, you're taught self-control, self-discipline. And above all, there was this quest for truth, this seeking of knowledge and wanting to know God. And for me, I think that's what settled with me. So as young as I can remember, I've always sought God. By the time I was 14, I had read the Bible through several times. I think about probably 4 or 5 times at least. And somewhere in there, I just really made this commitment to want to know truth. And I kept being hit by this impression, I guess you could say, that truth is not elusive, that truth is something that is quantifiable, and that it can be discovered. In other words, if truth exists, we can find it because it's simply there. And I kept pushing that notion out of my mind. It was an earnest desire that I had. In fact, one of the major reasons that I married the man that I did is because he also had a desire to seek truth, and he was very supportive of that truth. So it was kind of a joint quest. So we married in, I think it was 93. I don't remember. Women aren't supposed to forget those things. But we married, and we ended up moving to New Orleans. The one place on earth I said I never wanted to live. And we have a couple businesses down here now. But our quest for truth, really continued through the 90s. And we began reading different books. And as we read those books, a couple of them really began to challenge my faith. It took me really to the core of, where Jeremiah says, "Behold, we've inherited lies of our forefathers." I really came to a point where I felt everything was a lie, and that I even questioned if there was absolutely no truth. And as so many scholars claim, that Scripture was simply a book of fables. Was it just simply something that, we only follow it because that happens to be the culture and that happens to be the brand of religion that we're born into? If I would have been born in India, I would have had a totally different religion and a totally different worldview. So is it just chance and circumstance, or was there some sort of heritage or something greater than the text itself? So that's really where my questioning began. So I began a journey of discovery. I began intensive scholarship using the highest academic standards, and I intentionally chose scholars that were atheist. And I predominantly worked off of their work simply because I figured if my questions, if my quest could stand up to the formidable arguments that they present, the challenges that they present to the existence of God, the challenges that they present to the historicity of ancient Israel, if I could find valid answers, if I could find valid evidence, and enough evidence to quench my questions, that maybe truth would emerge from that study. And that is indeed what I found happened. And I found a truth that is so freeing. It is so full of liberty because it's logical, it's honest, it's ethical, and it's based on something outside of ourselves. And it's something that's beneficial to humanity. So my bibliography, I believe, is over 1,000 books. So yes, I read 1,000 books in the preparation of.
That is amazing. I see a couple on your bookshelf behind you. We're going to be talking about later. Okay, that's really awesome. Yeah. Okay, question for you. Okay, as you were leaving your teenage years and you're up to this point where college might be in play, and now you've got this. At what point was the drive to actually start into the biblical and historical research specialist that you are? What pushed that to that point?
Yeah,
where
it really became accidental almost, because I originally started writing, and I thought I was writing a homeschool curriculum, something that I could share with my children, because there was really nothing out there that offered a truly biblical point of view. Everything was colored by some religious sect, and at one point or another, it departed from a textual base. So that was kind of the spurring behind my research. But as I got into it, I began studying 18 hours a day, reading book after book, or, following different lines of research. And as I did that, I began to become, kind of a specialist with ancient Near Eastern covenants, which are so key to understanding the covenants that God has given to us in the Hebrew text. And people think that there's just, the covenant that he made with Abraham, or the covenant that he made with ancient Israel. There's actually something like 16 separate covenants in the Tanakh, but because we don't take a very critical and a very detailed approach, we miss those specific covenants that really enlighten our understanding. So that spurred my research, and then it really went into other areas as well. Archaeology, I had to deal with a lot of excavation reports. I had to deal with different studies, with ancient Israel and comparative. And I had to take on scholars, the most outspoken scholar against the historicity and the validity of the scriptures as we have them, of the story and the narrative that the Tanakh tells, is Israel Finkelstein. And he makes a lot of assumptions. And that was the other thing that I really discovered. As I got into my studies and my studies progressed, I really came to see that every single scholar out there has created a false paradigm. So, and I forget I'm a little fuzzy on this because I haven't dealt with it in a while, but in logic, there is a fallacy of logic where you create a false premise, and politicians do this all the time. You create a false premise, and then you disprove that false premise. Well, it's easy to disprove because it was false to begin with. And that's really what most of your scholars have done today, especially, again, Israel Finkelstein, where they create a false date for the Exodus. They create a false paradigm, and they make vast assumptions that are not advanced by the Hebrew text. And then they can easily disprove it through archaeology and through epigraphic seals and different things, because the information contradicts what they are looking for. But then when you go back to the scriptural text and you reconstruct Israel's history directly from the text without making assumptions and without being prejudiced, say, by what one scholar thinks or what one religion thinks, you actually find something that there is so much evidence for that it becomes difficult to deny. You can't deny the historicity because at every single juncture and every single point, there is evidence to back it up. And let me give you one example. Right now I am working on an academic article. It was supposed to have been published in March, but I'm running behind because I've been so busy with the response that I've had to the book, which has been wonderful. But one of the things that I'm looking at regarding Israel's chronology is the climatic changes that occurred in the Levant in relationship to the stories that we have in the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, as some people call it. And what you find is that we have evidence of a famine in the days of Abraham, and it really went into the days of Isaac, and both narratives record the famine in both their days. Then we also have evidence of a famine under Joseph. And we think that the famine under Joseph was the most earth-shattering famine. It really wasn't, and that's simply because Egypt and Canaan, kind of that area, operated under a different climatic system where they were more dependent on the Nile, but it indeed did affect parts of Canaan. But the big famine, the famine that really kind of put all the others to shame and was just absolutely survival for the land of Canaan and into the Hittite territory. And it's questionable as to how far, into Turkey and Greece it went, but it's obvious that it went quite a ways into the territories, was the one that occurred during the days of Merneptah. And that famine essentially caused the downfall of the Hittite Empire. Well, we have record of this in the Judges and in the book of Ruth, of the famine where Elimelech migrated to Moab. We have evidence that at the same time Moab begins to exist as a political entity where it didn't at any other time before. So when Elimelech migrated, he was going to the city that's up and coming, going from, say, rural Ohio, say, to Pennsylvania or New York, something like that. And it really made a huge difference, as far as the evidence that we have when you place and you date the information that we have in Scripture according to the right time period. The 13th century Exodus date, what that really means is that scholars are dating the Exodus to 1250 BCE. When you put the Exodus there and then you try to find a famine whereby Elimelech or say the Moabites and the Amalekites would have raided Israel or any of that type of scenario, it's so far late. There's nothing to uphold it. There's no evidence to support it in any way. But when you go back to the paradigm that is established straight from the text, you find that, lo and behold, there is so much evidence to support it that it becomes very difficult to then deny it.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I'd like to point out too, I noticed in your in your lineup, you've got supporters of people who've read your book. One would be Simcha Jacobovici, as well as James Tabor, and they seem to give you two great big thumbs up on this book, which is really exciting. Just that alone makes me want to read it. Makes me want to find out more about it. So, how did you get involved with these guys anyway? How did you end up in their circle? Was it just a natural consequence of the path that you're on and your research?
Partly, Simcha, back, I believe it was in 2002 or 2004, released a documentary called the Exodus Decoded. The reviews on it are mixed because he does put a lot of emphasis on the plagues and explaining the miraculous from the plagues. But his paradigm and what he presents is very textually based. It's very, very strong. And it has a lot of evidence and a lot of support from the biblical text. So when he and I talked and I explained to him my Exodus scenario and the evidence that I had, and honestly, what my research really gives his theory the scholarship that it needs to really gain, I think, traction, because his documentary was wonderful and it presented a lot of ideas that I don't think had really been out there before. So, and so that contact was just an incredible blessing, and I'm so grateful to have him as a supporter of my work. And then James Tabor, we actually met through an organization called the United Israel World Union. And that is a organization that really promotes the idea of the establishment of Israel and of upholding the covenants and of a legacy that the entire world will kind of come to this peace because Israel is established on the land and the covenants that God gave the patriarchs are reestablished with Israel. So that provided a way. And then the other scholar that has embraced my work has been Peter van der Veen. And some scholars you never know when you reach out to them and you share your work with them. And Peter I respect his work. He's a highly published author. He's in a Biblical Archaeology Review quite a bit. He publishes quite frequently and in a lot of major journals. And when I shared with him my paradigm, I shared with him the theory that I had on the Exodus, he was very open to it. And he found that the evidence for an earlier date definitely had support, and that it had a lot of biblical evidence as well as archaeological evidence. So I was very thankful that he was willing to write in the little blurb that they do that you can promote your book with.
Well, I'll tell you what, it seems like all the doors were opened up for you, which is also a really nice, it kind of gives you that comfort and that drive to continue on, when you've got the right winds to sail with. So it seems like, so in your, you know what, I'm kind of antsy. I really want to kind of get into your book. We were going to talk a lot about, I was going to try to really squeeze out as much of your childhood, but I think it would be really good just to move right into this book. As an overview, you mentioned that there was a blended perspective overall in your life. I'm not sure how much of it is applied to this book or whatever, how to kind of blending the politics and religion or something of that nature. Is that influenced in your book in this setting?
Well, what I discovered in my studies was that, and I think a lot of this has been because, let me do two steps here.
Okay.
First, you have religion for so many hundreds of years being manhandled by the Catholic Church or whatever religious organization that human beings, that say individuals such as you and I, really didn't have access to any ideas of government or any ideas of religion outside of the establishment, because it was all very top down and very top heavy. The other thing that we've had is that where religion is concerned, it's been very legislated, it's been very predetermined by government. or the absence of religion is determined by government. So we really have developed these two very arbitrary departments of religion in this department and government in this department. And what we're told in the Tanakh is that they're one and the same. There wasn't this separation of a criminal offense against the state versus a criminal offense against your neighbor. They were really one and the same, because the idea of a character and of a society that had morality was established by Israel's constitution.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
And in fact, I do show that, we tend to think of the Torah as a very religious document, as a very theological document, but it was even more so a government treatise. It was a treatise on government, and it established Israel's government and laid down ways in which it should function, very similar to the way that the U.S. Constitution does for America today.
It was funny you mentioned, well, it was more funny that I was thinking about it than it was the mentioning of it. But I got called in for jury duty one time, and this was just recently, probably about 8 months ago. And first time I'd ever been called in for jury duty. But I wasn't really excited about being there to begin with. But it was really, as they were like asking, the question to the people, raise your hand if you would have, or they would call on people, and for me, this was a perfect example of how religion and politics, or religion and whatever you want to call it, really should be connected somehow. Is one of the questions was, this guy apparently had stolen some stuff, and apparently he had 2 different times this supposedly happened, and they caught the guy. And they asked me, would you have a problem, issuing, the maximum penalty against this guy? And I began to ask them questions that I needed to know to be able to answer their question that were associated with Torah. I said, well, were there any witnesses? And just answer the question. And I'm thinking, well, according to the Torah, you have to have witnesses, to this sort of thing, So literally after about 2 or 3 times of me raising my hand saying, I can't do that. Finally, they called me up to the judges, up there at the front with the 2 lawyers and the judge. And the judge knew right where I was going, and they basically dismissed me. And unfortunately, in a way, the more I began to talk to them, go ahead.
It's very unfortunate.
It is, because at first I was wanting to get out, but then the more I was listening to this, I was thinking what they're doing really isn't right. And I'm thinking, I kind of wanted to stay as it got further along, but then he told me you're dismissed. I was like, give me my $10. I do.
You're just supposed to be there and push a button. You're not supposed
to. Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Which is sad, and that is the thing that our society has done, because our founding fathers did not base any sort of moral code within the Constitution. We have this dichotomy that allows for injustice. So here we have people who smoke marijuana. I know that's a controversial issue, and they end up being put away for 30 years. And then you have a murderer that it's his second, third time killing somebody, involuntary manslaughter perhaps, and he gets 5 to 10 years and he's out again.
Mm-hmm, right.
There's just the justice in that. There has to be some sort of moral code that unites your nation. And that is what God did with the Tanakh, or rather with the Torah, is he gave them a constitution that they could live by, that their society could function, and it provided unity. I mean, look at the things in America and even in Europe that divide us, whether it's, and we're going politics here, whether it's immigration, whether it is morality issues, whether, there's a huge move in Europe right now that I was seeing this week, and it's actually a movement very well alive here in the United States, that incest should be a human right and that it should be recognized by all governments. And what I found in my study is that every single thing that is prohibited by Torah is something that is harmful to humanity. So circumcision, in my book, I cite study after study that has studied circumcision across 7 continents, and in every single case, it is beneficial to humanity. It doesn't matter if the person is Muslim, Christian, or Jew. If they are circumcised, you receive the benefit. And the reason for this is that uncircumcised men harbor a lot of bacteria.
Right.
And women, their partners, during intercourse, there is infection and there is bacteria that is deposited. So women of those uncircumcised men are 8 times more likely to develop cervical cancer. Men are also more likely to develop disease from not being circumcised. So every single thing in Torah, incest is prohibited, because you find that, and study after study show this, that when you marry close relations, you're more likely to have a disabled child. Mm-hmm. In fact, right now, Denmark is dealing with a lot of, just like their social system is really being burdened down, because what they're facing is Muslims are coming into their country. They're not assimilating, but they are marrying their cousins. And then they are having, I believe it was an 80% rate of disabled children within those offspring, because they're marrying within a close society. And that's something, you know, that is prohibited in Torah. Now, you say, you know, in Torah it was just cousins, but I'm sorry, in Torah it was just like aunts and uncles that were prohibited. But I would argue that the genetic makeup of Israel's society was as such that it did not need to be extended at that point in time, because the disability was not there. Now things are so isolated, and DNA works as such that it extends to cousins and maybe second cousins to prevent those type of genetic maladies from occurring. So, but in every single case where we look at Torah's moral code, it was always for the benefit of society. It was always for the general welfare, promoted the general welfare of Israel's entire community and made them strong. And when you are a nation that does not have disease because you eat right, which Torah bans pork and shellfish. And in my book, again, I show that the type of meats, the unclean meats, tahor meats that Torah prohibits, are those that in every single case are more toxic. They have more rates of parasites, they have more rates of bacterium, and they are more harmful to humans. Those that are allowed have the least toxicity. So there, in every single case, there's this correspondence to a benefit to humanity for the things that God taught Israel. And so when you become, Deuteronomy 4, verse 6 through 8 says, what nation is there among the nations of the earth that has laws as righteous and as just as these? And what nation is so wise and understanding and strong? So when you do these things, you become strong, you become the head and all other nations become the tail. Now we've really, in our postmodern society and our tolerant society, we really kind of devalue this idea of being the strong and mighty nation. Nobody wants to be strong. Nobody wants to be mighty, because then, you're going to oppress somebody, or no one's going to have the same rights as you. You're not going to be equal with the other nations. That's not the Torah paradigm. You're not supposed to be equal. You're supposed to excel. You're supposed to strive for excellence. And when you do that, you find that you do become the head of all nations. Other nations do become the tail, because they're not living this Torah lifestyle. But the Torah also tells us, especially in the Tanakh with Isaiah and Jeremiah, this idea that when Israel is reestablished, that all the nations will eventually learn knowledge. They will eventually learn Torah. So eventually, though it starts with Israel, it will go to all other nations, to where we all follow this constitutional precept that establishes liberty and justice and morality and ultimately health within our society, so that we can reap those blessings and so that we can be that light to the nations.
So could you just briefly kind of go through the layout of your book? You don't have to call out each chapter and title, but just kind of a blended cover to cover approach to the conclusion of this book. And this is volume 1, I notice it says. And so you've got volume 2 coming. Is it out already?
No, I have volume 2 about 80% written. I have about 2.5, maybe 3 chapters to go. And even those chapters are roughed in. So I just have some shoring up to do of it. There is some scholarship that I want to add to it, just simply because I haven't had time to do that. Typically you go and you read, and sometimes you think, oh, I'm just reading this, and then you realize it's something that is beneficial and you can use it. in your research and in your writing, so then you have to go back through it again. So I have a lot of the knowledge of things that I've read, just stored and filed away. But now it's the matter of accessing the actual page it's on so you can source it and include it in your work. So that's kind of where I am with that. But that can be out in about 18 months. What I'm trying to do now, I actually have another series that I'm working on. It's called the Archaeological, Historical, and Scriptural Evidence 4, and it's 4 series. It's Ancient Israel's Chronology, then it is Chronology, the Exodus, the Conquest, and then we go to the Monarchy and Divided Kingdom era. So I deal with those. I kind of expand some of the chapters in my book to include a whole lot more information that I could not cover in my book. As my book as it is about 990 pages. It has 70 charts or tables in there to illustrate
Nice.
chronology and to illustrate different things. It has about 60, because there's a total of 260 different illustrations, but it has about 60 or 80 different photographs and different items to illustrate the text. So it's not just, just text itself. It is supported with pictures. We have pictures of Hetzor in there. And so it's very, I think, well balanced. At least that's the reviews that I'm getting. So the layout of volume 1, we begin by putting God on trial. And I did this because it was my own personal quest as to whether or not God was righteous. And what I reasoned was that you could have a God, he could exist, but what good does it do if that God is not righteous? For instance, the Muslim idea of God. There's lots of those people that believe he's real and that he exists. But as I study the Quran, as I read the teachings of that religion, and as I come to understand the core philosophies and what is desired with that religion, I conclude that that God is unrighteous, and it is not a God that I could serve in any way. So with Torah, I applied the same weights and measures, the same test to Israel's God. And I had to try his way. I had to see if it held validity. I had to see if it was righteous in the judgments that, is it oppressive? Is it something, for so many years, one of the reasons our founding fathers in America did not include religion or any aspect of religion in the Constitution is because the only religion they had known was one that oppressed, one that divided, and one that suppressed. And what I found in my discovery of Torah was the exact opposite. In the covenant, Yahweh says, behold, I have made you stand upright. I have delivered you from the house of bondage. And Torah is perfect liberty in every way. So my book progresses through, the entire book is this trial of God. And as we examine each area, I draw a conclusion. Did God pass the test in this one particular area? So you can't have a valid discussion on God. You can't have a discussion on theology of God or what the Tanakh advances until you can say, well, it happened. There's validity to it. Otherwise, we're talking about fairy tales. Are we really going to argue about the Cyclops and whether the Cyclops had 1 foot or 2 feet or exactly where he lived? Are we going to have those arguments if we don't believe that Cyclops really existed? So the same thing for the Tanakh. We have to first establish that it is valid, that it is some sort of divine document handed to man. And yes, there are errors in it because it was, copied and errors did enter in, but that does not diminish the theology of it. It does not diminish the philosophy that is contained within the book. So my first step, I go through the ancient covenants. I go through Genesis 49 and the divided blessing because we find that each of those affect Israel's history. So the first foundation is covenants, then it's the blessings of the patriarchs, then it's the national blessings and the national covenants. From there, we extend out and we go through the scientific validity of the law. We go through cosmology. which is creation. So we look at the biblical view of creation and what the Torah supports, and the prophets as well. Then from there, once we establish that Israel law is valid, that it is honorable, and that it is something, a way of life that we can live by, which throughout the Torah it talks about Abraham and Israel walking in the way of the Creator. And as we establish that this way is valid, then we go and we look at the government. Well, what type of government and what type of morality within that government was established for the people of Israel to follow? And once that's established, then we can say, okay, what about historicity? So then we go through the historicity of chronology, because chronology is really a starting point. Then after you go through chronology, then you go through the Exodus, then the conquest, then the evidence for ancient Israel, which there is so much evidence for the nation of ancient Israel. And don't let any scholar tell you otherwise, because we have more evidence for Israel, ancient Israel, than what we do any other nation other than Egypt. And then from there, we go into the testimony. And the testimony is really something that has been lost for 2,500 years. The Creator gave Isaiah a commission to blind Israel and to hide the testimony, and to kind of hide its purpose and how it works. So a lot of my research about the last 5 chapters of my book are restoring the testimony to our knowledge today and demonstrating how it worked anciently and the implications of that testimony for us today. And in just a very short definition, the testimony is more or less a prophetic law. It's a law within the Torah that defines all prophecy. So it defines it from the moment of the monarchy all the way through our present day and the future restoration of Israel from all the nations of the earth. And that's for me, just an incredible, it gives you so much hope, because what is ordained in Israel's future, and for those of us, and our ancestors that have gone through all the trying, and, Isaiah talks about God bringing Israel through the fire and refining Israel as silver, and as the gold of Ophir. And those of us today are really the result of that refining process. These people that are willing to serve the Creator and willing to look to Him alone, and finally say, I'm willing and I'm ready, where our forefathers were not. And what we find is ordained for our future is incredible hope and comfort, and this incredible restoration that God promises, and the covenants promise, that is very nigh to come.
Wow, that was a mouthful.
Yes, yes.
So, okay, let me just kind of go back in a recap. If you were to, in just a summary, and just as opposed to like going over the specific titles and such, if you was to try to explain that to, say, like I have a teenage son, actually a teenage daughter and a younger adult son. If you were to explain your book in general to them, how would you summarize your book?
I would say that it demonstrates the validity of ancient Israel, and it shows us why God's ways work. When you research it and you see the scientific evidence backing up what God says, it makes it real. It's no longer just theory or a story. It makes it real to your life so that you can know God for yourself and you can walk in His ways.
Okay. Well, that's definitely a comfortable approach for sure, and very informative as well. So is there anything that you would like to tell the viewers out there, not just about this book, but also about your future work? We've already discussed volume 2, which is you said about 18 months out, maybe, plus or minus however much time it will take. And so you've is there more work that you've done? You mentioned, for example, probably close to 1,000 books or something that you've read.
Yes.
I can't even wrap my head around that. However, In the screen behind you, I see. I'm having to lean over to see here. You've got Philo, you got Josephus. What is probably one of your favorite historical books that you've read so far?
Okay, some of my favorite books. Okay, I'm gonna go pull some off the shelf here. Okay.
Oh, perfect. Do that. That'd be great. Okay. Oh, see, I didn't even get to see up there. You've got the special zone up above the cloud line.
So one of my favorite books is going to be the Ancient Near Eastern Text by Pritchard. This is pretty standard for anyone who works in the field of biblical research. And what makes the book so special is that rather than having to rely on someone else as to what a text states or if they talk about anything to do with ancient Israel, this one book is a compendium volume that up until I believe about 1975 has every known ancient Near Eastern text, a translation of it, that relates to anything in the Tanakh. So if it's an Egyptian correspondence where it's referred to in Scripture, it's going to be there. If it's an Assyrian invasion of Canaan or of Israel, for instance, we have one thing that is not well known among people is that everybody knows that Sennacherib came and he accosted Jerusalem under Hezekiah when Hezekiah was king. And we also know that Sennacherib deported a large majority of the Ephraim or the Israelite population. What people don't know is that of Judah, he also deported 250,000 people from the land of Judah, from Lachish and all the surrounding cities that surrounded Jerusalem. So when you talk about the northern diaspora, when you talk about that assimilation, Judah was part of that. And Judah was deported very, very early, long before the majority of the citizens, long before the final destruction by Nebuchadnezzar.
What is the name of that book? I'm going to put that up on the screen because
it's very expensive. So I believe the current price, there it is, and it's by Pritchard.
Ancient Near Eastern Text. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I believe it runs around $210 or $310.
Wow.
It's not a cheap book. Another one, and this one is easier. This one is going to be Malamat, who is the father of Israelite history. Very, very good. He presents a lot of good analysis and good treatments of history of Israel. And again, you have to like studying Israelite history. For me, I love how the stories come to life and how all of a sudden, because of their research, I understand something in the biblical text that I wouldn't have understood before without, and what it's called comparative biblical studies, because you're taking the biblical text and you're bringing in what we know from ancient cultures. So there might be a text, say, from Egypt that sheds light. Let me give you an example. One of the commands in Torah is to put a fringe, a tzitzit, around it says the edge or the fringe of your garment. And it says around the four corners. Today, modernly, theologians will interpret that very literally. You have to have four corners. But what we find when we go back to, this was given 1500 BCE. When we go back to contemporary documents, we find that the idiom four corners meant a circumference. So it would have been something that would have gone around the entire circumference of your garment. And in fact, we have a picture of Israelites actually obeying this command. If you look at and you can go online and you can go Google this and see it, you have a black basalt monument of Shalmaneser, and you have Jehu, the king of Israel, bowing before him. If you will look at his garment, you will see there is a fringe that goes around the complete circumference of that garment. In my chapter on the Canaan conquest, I show two ambassadors from Canaan to Egypt, and guess what they have? these ambassadors have fringes of red and fringes of blue around the entire circumference of their garments in direct, upholding that direct command that we find in Numbers. So it gets really interesting. Scripture just totally comes alive when you get into history and seeing how other nations would have applied things, or how the knowledge from other nations really sheds the light on the Tanakh and just totally brings it to life.
Wow. I tell you what, I feel like we've have taken it and really dissected it quite a bit. Of course, I know there's lots and lots of jewels hidden inside there. It's 1,000 pages or something like that, and 900 and something pages.
990, and that includes all the charts. There are another 300 pages, because I believe it tops out at 1184 when you include the preface and the table of contents and stuff like that. But I have about 300 pages of footnotes and about 50 pages of bibliography.
Okay, tell us a website that people can go
Sure.
to track this out.
Thank you. There's two different websites. My website is www.YHWH Exists, just EXISTS.com. And right now it's cheaper to get it there because Amazon has been kind of finicky with the pricing. Amazon.com is the other way, and Amazon will ship overseas. I do have some people that have contacted Amazon, and Amazon has made that available. So through Amazon right now, I think it's the full retail price, which is $59, but it is cheaper on my website. And also on my website, I have radio interviews that I've done. I have TV interviews. I also have some teachings that I've done posted on there, some video teachings that people can check out too if they're interested. This past Shabbat, I did a teaching on why or how a loving God can allow pain and suffering, and how the covenants that he gave to ancient Israel not only answer that question, but provides us a way as a society and as a community to move out of that pain and suffering phase that we've been in the last 2,000 years.
Wow. Well, you know what? I'm pretty sure that there's going to be a lot of people following your work coming up. It's just you've got a busy life, and it's the fruits of it are showing really strong. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Jodell Onstott, what a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much. We will probably try for sure, if she can have time and it all works out well, get another episode coming on. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, that was Jodell Onstott, and you can find her book at her website and Amazon. Do not forget. Shalom, shalom. And until next time, להתראות.
חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה.